let's use a PyQGIS class and do something useful. And that's where we'll learn how to read the documentation, how to find a class, how to create an object from it, and how to call the methods and do some work from that. The problem that we're going to solve is a problem. If you take in my introduction to Python class, we solve a problem of computing distances. So I give you 2 points on the surface of the Earth. I want to know what is the distance between them. And this is not an easy problem because you have to know on surface of the Earth, what is the shape of the surface of the Earth. It's an ellipsoid. So you need to be able to do the computation on the surface of an ellipsoid. And that's a very complex calculation. But in QGIS knows how to do this. And QGIS gives you this class called QGIS distance area. This is the class which has the functions to be able to compute distances in area for different objects. And we can use this class to compute the distance between 2 points. Let's see how to do this. We'll start the hands-on part now. Section 4 on using PyQGIS classes, where we'll take one class and see how to use it. At this point, again, keep watching. We have an exercise for you to try this code afterwards. Let's say I have these 2 coordinates. I have these 2 coordinates, San Francisco. This is the latitude and longitude of San Francisco, New York, latitude and longitude. What's the distance between San Francisco and New York on the ellipsoid? I want to compute the distance. And I want to use PyQGIS for it. If I use the QGIS measure tool, you can see I have a, let me load some layer. So I'll, pro tip, if you need some data, world data, you can type in the coordinates tab in the QGIS, type world. You'll just load the world map vector layer. It's quite useful just to get a reference layer. So let's say I want to compute the distance between San Francisco and New York. If I use the QGIS measure tool, you can see there's a measure tool here. I can click here and click here, and you can see it shows me the distance. And it shows me distance in kilometers, meters. So QGIS knows how to compute this, but I need to do this in code. So what did QGIS use to compute this and convert all these units? This is the class that QGIS used. When I click this button and say compute, QGIS called this class QGIS distance area, which knows how to do ellipsoid-based computation and gave me this answer. So let's do this using code using this class. So we want to use this class called QGIS distance area. Let's learn how to use this class. We're going to open up the class documentation. All of the QGIS classes are documented in this page, which is the QGIS Python API documentation. The classes may change over different releases. So there are pages, documentation pages for each release. Since we are working on the current LTR, which is currently 3.34, so we are looking at the documentation for that. If you find something is changed, you can go and say, how was this class in the previous release? And you'll have a page for that. So most of the time it's not changed, but sometimes they introduce new variables, they rename the class and so on. So there are documentation pages specific to each of those versions. All of those classes are documented here. They're also separated by different top level ones. So there are core. So this is the core classes. There are GUI classes. There are analysis classes. There are processing classes. There are 3D classes and so on. So this class is part of the QGIS core. That means it's a core functionality that is provided by this. You can read the documentation. First you read. This explains how the class works. We need to know how to construct an object from a class. I want to use this distance area class. So at the top, you'll have the constructor. Here, it says there's no parameter. You can just construct it just with no parameters, and you'll get an object. So this is how we construct an object of that. So first step, I want to use this class. The class has a lot of methods, and I want to use this. So first step, I'll use this object and say I will construct an object from that. So I want to. The constructor doesn't take any arguments. That's what the documentation said. I'll save this into some variable. So now I have this D. Let me print it. What is D here? D is an object of type QGIS distance area. Perfect. But I need an object to be able to run some function. So my first step is done. I got an object. Many of you, when you first tried, you might try doing something like this. Say, I am a QGIS distance area. I want to run some function. Well, QGIS distance area is not an object. Is a class. So you cannot run functions on QGIS distance area. You need to first construct an object. In this case, the constructor said in documentation, just no parameters. Many times you'll see some parameters that you need. to construct it. Right now, you can just construct it by no parameters. And now you got an object. What you can do, you can see there are different methods. These are all the methods you can run on this class. The documentation says, if a valid ellipsoid has been set, all the calculation will be performed using ellipsoid algorithms. That is, the surface of the Earth will be assumed as an ellipsoid. And that's what we need for all geospatial calculation. We need to set an ellipsoid. So first, we need to call this function to set an ellipsoid. So we have this function here, set ellipsoid. Set ellipsoid, self, and the string with the ellipsoid name. Now, when you have a function like this, first argument is self. That means I need an object. So I need to run this function on an object. So I already have an object called D. I need to set an ellipsoid. And this one, the second argument is the name of the ellipsoid. And you can see that all the ellipsoid names are available here. We'll just use the WGS84 ellipsoid, which is the most commonly used ellipsoid. If you're in Europe, many projections use the GRS80 ellipsoid. So you may want to use that. WGS84 is derived from the GPS measurements, and this is the most accurate shape of the Earth that we know. So now we've set this ellipsoid. Let's see what this class can do. Now, this class can do a lot of things. It can measure length. So if you have a geometry, a line, it'll just say, what is the length of the line? That's useful. This class can also measured line. So there's a measure line function which says measures the length of the line with multiple segments. So we can say I don't have a geometry, but I can create a line between these 2 points, and I can use this measure line function to give me the length of the line. How do I call this function? Well, this function, again, the first argument is self. So I can say d.measureLine. Okay. What do I need? It says I need a list of QGIS point xy. So I need some points. I'll create a line and measure the length of the line. Well, I need a list of point xy objects. How do I create this class? Well, I can click on it and say, this is another class to represent a 2D point. So I need to create a point class from this, and then I can create a list of this and measure the line. So, okay, need to create a QGIS point xy object. What's a constructor? The constructors can be created different. There are different constructors available. We have the constructor here, QGIS point xy, x and y coordinates. If you have x and y coordinates, you can create a point object from that. So let me just create first point. So before I can call this, I need to create my point 1 is QGIS point xy. So this is the 2D point geometry, and I need x and y coordinates. So this is latitude and longitude. So I'll say my San Francisco of 1. So this is the second value, and San Francisco of 0. We say lat long, but latitude is actually y coordinate, longitude is x coordinate. So since this point says I want x and y coordinates, we need to give it in opposite order. Similarly, we can construct a second point, which is my New York point. So I'll say New York So now I have 2 points of this point xy class, and now we can say I want to call this function measure line, and this needs a list of QGIS point xy objects. So I can just say measure line 1, point 2, and it's a list of them. And this will give me the distance. Let's see if everything worked. I should get the answer. And you can see I get an answer. This is the length of the line connecting the point from New York to San Francisco on WGS84 ellipsoid, 414 kilometers. So this is the answer is in meters. And you read the documentation, the answer will be in meters, and you can then convert it later. If you want the answer in meters, I can just say divide by 1,000. So 445 kilometers. So we learned how to take a class, initialize it, and then I want to call this function on this to do some computation. This needed me some point objects. So I could take a point class, initialize this with X and Y coordinates, and then compute the distance between those. Let's say you have a pair of million points. You want to compute the distance. You don't want to do this using the user interface, right? You can just write a code like this. Try this out. All of you can take the code given here just before exercise 1. Go and run this code. Copy this and paste it. It's just a slightly different version of this code. We are just taking this lat long, saving this in lat1 and lon1 variables so we can call them easily. So make sure you copy this into an empty console script, run this, and you should get the answer 4145. This is in our section 4.1 in calculating distance. And once we run this, it's showing us the distance in kilometers between these 2 points that we've chosen. Question, do we need to import the modules? Well, the QGIS Python console imports all of the QGIS classes. So when you start the console, it just imports everything in the QGIS classes. So you don't need to do this. It's a good practice to import it, because if you run this in processing script or in action or other places, they don't import all the classes. So your code will be more portable if you import it. But otherwise, in this environment, this console will always import this. So your console runs something like this when it starts. It says from QGIS core, import star. It imports everything. So it's already there, done. You don't need to import it again. But again, I find it a good practice to import it so that I can paste this in somewhere else and the code will not get an error. We are ready to do our first exercise. Vigna, you can explain our exercise 1.